Welcome to Asking Ultimate Questions. I'm Robert Lawrence Kuhn. I'm the creator and host of Closer to Truth, a long-running series on public television in the US, extensive website and YouTube channel that presents scientists and philosophers asking and trying to answer ultimate questions. Ultimate questions explore the most fundamental levels of existence, awareness or meaning, in categories or areas of knowledge that we deem important. Closer to Truth is very pleased to collaborate with the Institute of Arts and Ideas and How the Light Gets In Festival. Now, I'm going to begin by giving you a whole list of ultimate questions that we cover on Closer to Truth. These are just some of them. Now, I don't want you to think too hard about any of them, but just let each one kind of wash over you so you get the whole feeling of what ultimate questions are all about. Then we'll figure out how to deal with them. Okay, let's begin. Here are some ultimate questions. How did the entire cosmos come about? Now, the entire cosmos means not just our universe, because there may be more than that. So how did it all come about? How did our universe begin? Is cosmic inflation real, chaotic, and eternal? That's the dominant theory about how the universe began, but there are challenges to it. Will our universe end in heat death? That means the death of heat, so there's no more heat, there can't be anything happening because all is dispersed. Is that our ultimate final end? Is our universe infinite? There are different theories. Some say finite, some say infinite. Even if there are multiple universes, our universe itself might be infinite. Are there multiple universes, a so-called multiverse? Is our universe fine-tuned for life and mind? Because the constants of physics have to be so close to a tolerance limit that if they were any different, there couldn't be structure, there couldn't be stars or planets, and certainly there couldn't be life and mind. Could our universe be a simulation that some other intelligent beings in another universe or a different part have put on a computer? This is a very serious theory about how the universe, our universe is. There are many arguments for that. I don't find them terribly persuasive, but I think they offer deep insight into the nature of reality. Are there alien intelligences? What are the deepest laws of physics? Is there a final theory of everything, which is a final theory of physics? What are the foundations of quantum mechanics? Quantum mechanics is enormously effective, can be calculated to 10 or more decimal points in terms of its accuracy, but what does it really mean in terms of superposition and entanglement? These are very critical elements to understand. In quantum mechanics, is it fundamental? Quantum field theory, is that the deepest level that we have? Most people think no. There must be something below that, whether it's string theory or other theories need to explain that. How to harmonize general relativity with quantum mechanics. That's the big holy grail in physics today, because both general relativity talks about the structure of the universe and gravitation, but quantum mechanics deals with the most micro level. And when you go back to the origin of the universe, the two blend together. Black holes, they blend together. So how do they work together? At this point, they're still fighting each other. Does strong emergence defy prediction? Now, strong emergence is the idea that when you have things that you can't explain, such as consciousness today, a physicalist theory would say that is the product of what's happening at the more foundational levels of the neuroscience, the chemicals, the electrical activity in the brain, and it kind of emerges. So the key question is, we know emergence happens in many different ways. For example, H2O, if you have two molecules of hydrogen and one of oxygen, if you have oxygen gas and hydrogen gas, it doesn't seem rational. You put them together and suddenly you have something that's wet or that can freeze. But you can predict that from the structure of the molecules and how the hydrogen and the oxygen are aligned with each other. But are there things that you could not do that? Is there emergence? That's called strong emergence. What is time? A critical aspect of physics. Is time travel possible? We deal with these on Closer to Truth very significantly. Is space quantized? Space to us looks like it's just a flowing kind of environment, an ether that just is all the same. But people think that maybe in its smallest form, space can be divided into parts, and that like quantum theory in physics. Do black holes or the Big Bang have true singularities? That's what the prediction says. But what is a true singularity, where the density is infinite and the space is essentially zero? What does that mean? Is mathematics discovered or invented? A very deep question in terms of understanding reality. Are there realities beyond physics? Now, physicalists and materialists would say, no, that's a self-contradiction. Physics and the physical world is all there is. But many people, certainly those who are religious or people who see other ideas about consciousness in the universe, or people who believe in various religions, would say there are realities beyond physics. Remember, when we ask ultimate questions, we're not saying we believe these things. We're saying these are the kinds of questions that give us the deepest sense of what reality is. What is causation? Now, we see billiard balls on table. When one hits the other, they move. That's obviously a causation. Well, in quantum physics, causation becomes different. Some people can talk about backward causation, or backward causation in time. That seems highly illogical, but in quantum physics, there may be those kinds of events. So causation is a deep philosophical and a scientific question. Now, of course, some of the big ones. What is consciousness? We dealt with that this morning on a panel. There are many different views of consciousness. Is consciousness fundamental? What that means is that is consciousness at the most irreducible level of reality? Does it exist there? Many theories say that it does. Religious theories, certainly, whether the consciousness is God or some other things. Eastern religion have a kind of a cosmic consciousness. But physicalists believe, of course, that consciousness is derivative, that it's the product of the evolution of brain and mind, of the brain that eventually leads to consciousness. Most people would believe in evolution in either case, but some would say that physically it's impossible for mental experiences and awareness to be derived from anything physical. So that's the critical question there. So is consciousness fundamental? Is it cosmic? Ask the question, is there something greater than the human consciousness that each of us understand? Again, many Eastern religions believe in a kind of cosmic consciousness. Are persons all material? Are we only made of flesh and blood and physical, explainable in terms of physics and chemistry? And then the opposite of that, do persons have souls? Many traditional religions, people throughout time have largely believed in that. The soul can be immortal. It goes back to Plato and many religious traditions, or it can have various features that different religions have had over time. What maintains personal identity? Why am I the same person today that I was when I was 5 years old? My hair was different. Every molecule in my body was different. It turns over maybe every few weeks, every few months. That nothing is the same. What maintains that personal identity that I always feel on me? Do we have free will? Free will is a major topic on Closer to Truth. We deal with it extensively. We have many videos on that. It's not a simple question, I can assure you. Is morality absolute or relative? Does morality stand beyond just human understanding? Is extrasensory perception, ESP, like telepathy, mind reading, or precognition, knowing the future, is that real, or is that even possible? Most scientists would dismiss that, but there's a large group of people who believe that fervently, and it's a question to be put on our ultimate question list. Not that I'm saying I believe things like this, but I do feel that they are worthy to be ultimate questions and to be addressed. Obviously, is there life after death? That's a question that affects all of us. I'm not saying what that life may be. That could be further questions, and there's vast differences of people who believe in life after death, of what that could mean. Religious individuals and the Abrahamic religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam have a certain kind of belief in an afterlife, at least traditionally. Eastern religions have a different view of merging back into a cosmic consciousness. People who believe in ESP have different views of what could happen. So we're asking, there are two levels here. One is there something, anything after death in terms of awareness or some kind of life? Life does not have to be awareness. That's a subset of that. And then you can go on to what is that like? Then do near-death experiences reveal an afterlife or anything? That's NDEs. Is increasingly capturing public attention and public interest. We get many questions about that on Closer to Truth. I'm personally a little bit skeptical about what these mean in terms of any great meaning, but a lot of people put a lot of stock into it, and it needs to be on the list to be able to explore in depth. Then we get to, the big question of does God exist or something like God? These are very much critical topics that have occupied people's lives and intellectual lives for millennia, of course. It's on the list. It's not the only ultimate question, but it certainly is. And then if God exists, what is God like? The attributes of a deity or different kinds of deities, and how do these interact together? And what do different global religious traditions say about that? All different and all exploration. What are best arguments for theism and atheism? None of them, I submit, would be totally persuasive, certainly not in a mathematical or even a scientific sense. But to explore best arguments is I believe, a worthwhile exercise. We do that a lot on Closer to Truth for both atheism and theism, and for agnosticism as well. What causes religious belief? That's a question that deals with human psychology, evolutionary psychology. What are the aspects of mental functioning that lend ourselves to religious belief or belief in a God? And if you can show those kinds of through cognitive science or neurocognitive science how the brain works, does that eliminate the possibility of God because we show it physically? No, the religious believers and religious scholars would argue that shows how God put into our brain the capacity to understand God. So none of these questions are going to give you definitive answers. People can interpret them differently, but I pose that to pose these questions is critical, that we need to pose these questions and confront them, and not just one at a time. You've probably heard every question, at least most of them, that I'm going to be asking at different times. But what I want to do is to give you all of them at once, or not, they're not all of them, they're just a subset, but give you a whole lot of them at once so you can see the vastness of the concept of ultimate questions. Then, do any religious scriptures reveal transcendent truths? They all claim that they do, but is there anything in any of them beyond just great wisdom literature? We all recognize the wisdom literature, but is there anything beyond that? Must science and theology conflict? Most people see challenges between the two, although many people try to harmonize them. And how does that work? Is the universe theologically ambiguous? And what I mean by that is that I know, and we feature on Closer to Truth, many very, very smart people who are scientists and philosophers. And let's just take the scientists. And while I'd say most of them maybe do not believe in God, a healthy subset do believe. And I pose that you could, give them all IQ tests or test the number of papers they've written and how respected they are in science, and not be able to find a significant difference among them. And so I then pose the question: if such smart physicists and neuroscientists, if there are some who do believe in God, what does that say about the evidence that they're each looking at? So I pose the question, therefore, is the universe theologically ambiguous? Is biological evolution entirely random? Gets deeply into it. We'll be dealing on Closer to Truth in the philosophy of biology in future years. Is the scientific method the only way to know deep truth, or are there truths about reality that escape the scientific method? Methodological naturalism is, in a sense, the scientific method. You can only know things through this kind of physical approach. Is that correct? And then is metaphysical or ontological, the nature of being naturalism, correct? Those are two ways of looking at naturalism. One is the process by which you study it, and the other is the substance of what it is. Can metaphysics, which is a philosophical discipline, discern realities undiscoverable by science? Most scientists would probably say no to that. I leave that as a question. Can teleology, that means purposes as explanations, you explain something that happens by where it's going, its result, which seems to most scientists backwards, that teleology should never be an explanation. But some challenge that. Some say that teleology, seeing purposes as explanations, can work. Realism versus anti-realism. Can we know what reality as reality really is? We can see regularities and laws, but can we see deeply into the nature of realism? Here's one of my favorite, and it takes two individuals we've featured on Closer to Truth and pits them against each other in a way. And they're good friends. Tragically, Steven Weinberg just recently died, a great contributor to science and humanity over the course of his great life. But he said, the more we know about the universe, the more we see that it's pointless. So his concept is the more we learn, the more we see that it's pointless. So I ask, is the universe pointless, as Steven Weinberg said? Or is it about something, as Paul Davies says? Paul is one of the people we feature on Closer to Truth a great deal. He's not a theist, but he says that the universe, he's not willing to use the word purpose, but he says it's about something. It's not pointless. And so how do we balance those two ideas? And then we have two categories of kind of big questions that we ask. What is the meaning of life, whether it's life generally or my life, your life as individuals in specific? That is not a question that we ask greatly on Closer to Truth, because it's not a question that necessarily has the roots in the scientific explanations of the world or dealing with the philosophy, but it is an overarching question that would be derived from an understanding of all of the others. And then, is there purpose in life? Is there, which is very specifically, again, for our life in general, human beings as a species, my life in particular. And I pose these two in juxtaposition to each other because they're often used synonymously, meaning and purpose being the same. And I offer that in order to parse, in order to dissect and tease apart the concept of meaning and purpose, is actually interesting in terms of exploring what these kinds of ultimate questions mean. And it depends on your semantics and how you view these questions. I look upon a purpose as something that is an active term. That is something that you affirmatively do, while as meaning is a broader term that can be applied. And then the two non-personal questions that are Closer to Truth favorites are what exists and why is there anything at all? What exists asks the question, or what are the fundamental, irreducible categories of reality? And it's a deep probe into what you think reality is. So if you're a physicalist, basically you would say the laws of physics at some deep level that we probably don't know at this point. If you are a religious believer, you might say, God is the primary category. But I'm trying to get at in different worldviews of this ultimate question, what are those categories that are irreducible one to the other? So, for example, consciousness is the big probe of what reality is. People who are physicalists, neuroscientists, many neuroscientists would believe that it's not a category. It's just derived from the laws of physics, then chemistry, then biology, evolutionary biology, neurobiology, and then you get consciousness emerging out of that. Others say, no, the so-called hard problem is that consciousness seems so different than the sloshing of neurochemicals and electrical impulses in the brain that it seems totally different. So they would have consciousness potentially being another category. Panpsychism has consciousness being along with the laws of physics. Idealism would have consciousness being the only primary category. So question is, what exists? What are those primary categories? And then why is there anything at all? That is the biggest question that you can possibly ask. And it lumps God and physics and string theory and everything you can think of into the same category and say, why is there something rather than nothing? And this is, many would say, the most profound question that we can ask. Now, what I have given you is 53 ultimate questions that I happen to like. And I'm happy that it turned out to be 53. I didn't plan to make 53 questions. I put the questions down, I did it a couple of times, and then I counted them, and there were 53. And I like the fact that it was an odd number because it signifies nothing. There's no magic numbers here. You may add other questions. I may add other questions. In fact, that's what we do. Let's add more ultimate questions. That's what we do on Closer to Truth. Now, I'm not going to try to answer any of these questions, but I am going to try to organize them. So Closer to Truth itself is organized by three large categories, what we call cosmos, on physics, cosmology, mathematics, philosophy of science, consciousness, which is on brain, mind, philosophy of mind, and meaning, which is on theism and atheism, philosophy of religion, but it also has critical thinking there because that's important. And we're soon to add a fourth on life, which will deal with philosophy of biology. So let's organize or classify these ultimate questions. And I propose, there's again, nothing magic about this, three frameworks organized by categories, organized by knowledge, and organized by hierarchies. So let's look at each one. So here we organize these questions. And again, I have 53, but there may be 100. There may be many hundreds of these kinds of questions. So the first is by categories. And we have three categories: existence questions, awareness questions, and meaning questions. So in the existence questions, we put all the science questions, especially the physics and the metaphysics, because metaphysics and physics both address questions of existence. They do it in different ways, and maybe the physicists don't like the metaphysicians too much, but I believe there's a role for metaphysics in understanding the nature of reality. Then I have awareness questions, and these deal with all the consciousness questions, whether it's, what is consciousness, or is there an afterlife, or near-death experiences, or ESP, all of these kinds of questions that are related to our mentality. And again, I'm not saying I believe these things, just that they warrant inclusion if we're going to have ultimate questions. And then the meaning questions, all the theism and atheism questions, again, with critical thinking needed to address them. So what you believe is helpful, but what we want to do when we're dealing with ultimate questions is subject all of them to critical thinking. And that's what I try to do on Closer to Truth. If there's one core way of thinking, it's to subject all views to a critical thinking, forcing each individual to present their views and then present in a logical fashion. And even if there are what I call leaps of logic or jumps beyond, I want to know where they are and to make it clear so we really understand it. Okay, the second way of organizing these questions is by knowledge. In other words, how do we know that? This is kind of epistemological way of thinking. So the first is observations and experiments. That's the way we can know things. And those are the science kinds of questions. Second category is a theoretical analysis, either iteratively with the observations and experiments or pure rational thought. Questions about God and the universe, like in the Middle Ages, scholasticism was all pure thought. There are arguments for God that's pure thought, the so-called ontological argument. And in physics, we have many areas that are now highly theoretical, that don't have experimental justification. And in some cases, people think that almost in principle, they cannot have observation or experimental demonstrations of it, but they're still so beautifully structured and so harmonious working together that they really, and they explain phenomena that we have, at least in retrospect, that they're worth considering. And areas of the multiverse, many universes, foundations of quantum mechanics, string theory, these are areas that are under a theoretical analysis. So I differentiate that. Then what I call pure rational thought, which are metaphysical questions, and then revelation, which is religious questions. And with revelation, I like to point out that some people would say that this is a so-called empty set, that there's nothing in revelation that's relevant. But remember, my exercise here with ultimate questions is to be universally exhaustive, to cover the landscape, not to be analytical, not to be judgmental. So that's why I include it here. The next way to organize these questions is by what I call hierarchies. And this is the way Closer to Truth is organized. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you short excerpts of the Closer to Truth website, where we have what's called a content guide, because Closer to Truth features well over 500, I gave you 53, 500 different kinds of ultimate questions. Now, they're arranged in a hierarchy, so you can say that there are more fundamental questions, yes, but all of them are this kind of category. So how do you organize them? And the way we do it is through the 4 levels of organization. And in the first level is cosmos, conscience, or meaning. And then below that, there are 3 other levels. And I'm just going to show you what it looks like. You see at the top the word cosmos. And then the second category are deep laws of nature. And then the third category, called subtopics here, cosmic fundamentals or time and space. And then there are many other below that. So this is just an excerpt of a long scroll. And then the final column are the specific kinds of questions in which many of our scientists and philosophers are commenting. So here's on consciousness, where the second category is the mind-body problem, and then other categories of brain function and structure, and then very specifically on the mind-body problem, and different categories along the right-hand side in terms of how a brain's structured, what do they do, what's their function, how do they act, different ways of approaching that question. Then in the meaning category, the second one here is philosophy of religion, and then under philosophy of religion, concepts of God, alternative concepts of God, faith and belief is the second category, and then many different categories under concepts of God, thinking about God in different ways. Does God make sense? Different people exposing it in different ways. So some people say that asking these kinds of ultimate questions are not really worth much. These are questions that cannot be answered, some say, and therefore should not be asked. And I disagree. I fundamentally disagree. I cannot think of anything more important, other than perhaps morality, that defines and differentiates us as human beings. As we like to say, simply asking ultimate questions brings us closer to truth.